Welcome back to Nightly Nonsense, where we make some sense out of the nonsense all around us. Hey, we're talking about last night, open invitations, right? Talking about open invitations. Do you understand that God's invitation is open to everybody, or are you still trying to figure out who is and who isn't, who should be and who shouldn't be, right? If God's open, says his invitation is open to everybody, who are you to stand in the way of that? It says he went out and got the good and the bad. That's what the servants brought in. Let's look at verse 11. We're going to wrap this whole thing up, hopefully tonight. If not, then tomorrow night, right? But verse 11 says this: but when the king came in to look at the guests, right? The king walks in and he looks at the guests. That's what he came in to do. Came in to look at the guests. So at this great banquet, the good, the bad are all brought in. Everybody was invited now. Those who were previously worthy, right, had been invited. They said no. God's dealt with them. So now he's going to deal with, he's looking at all of these other guests that came in. You understand that God's looking at you tonight, right? Number one, he's looking at who accepted the invitation, who didn't, who found their way into the wedding banquet venue, right? Who found their way in? He's looking at them. He doesn't just walk to the front of the table and say, hey, welcome, thank you all for coming, right? Just enjoy yourself. He's actually looking at the guests. If by now, the third time I've said that or so, it hasn't sent a shiver up your back, knowing that God is looking at the guests. He's looking at you. And here's what he sees. He saw there a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? Notice the interaction here. It isn't the same thing as the anger, right, to the people who just denied the invitation, didn't come and treated his servants wrong. There's a sense of, I know you, right? I know you. You're a friend. There's a sense of compassion. There's a sense of empathy. There's a sense of knowledge, of knowing, relationship even. Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? You see, that blows our minds. That's not part of our theology. But it's in this story. Somebody got to the wedding banquet. And Jesus, right? Jesus is the wedding garment. He is the wedding garment. He's what covers us. And somebody isn't clothed in Jesus. Kind of reminds me of a lot of people sitting in churches today. They're at the wedding banquet venue. They're at church every Sunday morning, but they're not covered by Jesus. So when God looks at them, he sees dirty rags. He sees the filthiness. He sees the sin. He sees the ugliness of life, not Jesus. It's pretty good theology to say, here's what happens. You and I stand in front of God, and our righteousness is as filthy rags, the Bible says. But Jesus steps in, and then God only sees Jesus. And then he sees us through his Son. And our unrighteousness is gone. We are made righteous through Jesus Christ. Like, that's how it works. The wedding garment is Jesus. He covers us. And so God walks down the table, and you can see him walking down the table. And he looks at each person, gives them a nod, calls them by name, knows them. But then he gets down the table, and he recognizes that there's somebody sitting there trying to partake in the wedding feast. They can be there attendance-wise. They're there. But when they try to partake, God says, friend, why don't you have the wedding garment? If God walked into your church, your home, your workplace, your small group, your whatever, if he walked in today, would he see a bunch of people that were attending but not able to participate. Where do you see a mixture? Some people who are able to participate, they have the wedding garment, they have Jesus. Or would he not? On a Sunday morning, do you assume that everybody who walks through the doors of a church has the wedding garment on? Has the right clothing on? Has Jesus? Because if you are, you're probably assuming wrong. There are people who've been invited, willing to attend, but they're not able to participate. I don't know all the ins and outs of that. I don't understand all of it. I know that our Bible says that there's going to be people standing in front of Jesus. He's going to say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." And they're going to have prophesied in his name. They're going to have done all kinds of things in his name, healed in his name. And he's going to look at them and said, "I never knew you." Just like here, there's somebody sitting somehow at this banquet, but doesn't have the wedding garment. So again, the wedding garment is Jesus. You've been invited to the wedding banquet. Are you going to have the right clothes on? Are you going to be dressed in your righteousness, which is rags? Or are you going to be clothed in the wedding garment, the righteousness that comes through Jesus? That's a huge decision. You have to figure that out tonight. This is probably the most important nightly nonsense, chew on this moment, that I could ever give you. You have to decide at this moment, if God the Father is walking down the banquet table, is he seeing your righteousness or the righteousness of Jesus? Is he seeing your filthy rags, or is he seeing the white, bright wedding garment of Jesus draped upon you, making you look a billion times better than you've ever looked before? Chew on that. We're going to wrap this whole thing up next time, right here, Nightly Nonsense.